Hello, I'm Billy Noel. Welcome to the very first Desert Island Tims. My castaway this week is a man who was instrumental in bringing Fergus McCann, the Bunnet, to Celtic. He is also the editor of the very popular fanzine, The Alternative View. Matt McGlone, how are you, sir?
Hello, Billy. Great to be here in this such wonderful island that you have. I'm complete with my sawn-off checked shirt and my sawn-off shorts. Exactly where I should be on your lovely island.
I'm glad you stuck to the dress code. Anyway, tell me about growing up in Glasgow, Matt. What was it like?
Growing up in Glasgow was, for me, we originally lived in the Lint House, and then we were sort of bulldozing around the place, and we moved up to Pollock, to Beltrees Crescent, and stayed there most of my formative years. I suppose Pollock was just like any other housing scheme in Glasgow, like Drumchapel, Easterhouse, Castlemilk, these kind of places, council houses everywhere. And people just got by on what you had, and you didn't expect too much because the guy next door and your friend down the street had more or less the same as you, next to nothing. But you were happy. Can't remember ever thinking that I was unhappy. I didn't have this, I didn't have that, because there was no electronic games at the time. There was obviously no internet. You had toys which were made of plastic or wood, and that was it. And then of course you had the skate, the single roller skate that you put the Bison annual on, and you looked for a hill nearby, and you sat in the skate with the book annual on it, and you went down, and that was your entertainment. Nowadays there's scooters and all sorts of things for kids, which is great. But in those days you get by with what you had, so you were happy.
I've read your book, Emotionally Celtic. Honestly think it's a really good book, and not only does it tell the things that happened during the Celts for Change years and the goings on at Parkhead, but I felt your book was a very nostalgic book. It brought back so many memories of growing up in Glasgow myself as a younger boy, and the things that went on at the time. Was that done intentionally?
Well, first of all, I never thought in a million years I could ever write a book. I had no skills whatsoever in that department, but I had come through quite a traumatic situation with Celtic, with the formation of Celts for Change and the outcome of Celts for Change, which brought about a real difference to Celtic, and culminating in March 1994. So I think the energy there and the drive to do the book was to tell the stories of what happened and how we got involved. And it wasn't until I had really written the last paragraph in the book that I ever had any confidence when I was actually writing the book as to whether the book would be a success or whether it would even be a book at all. So it was a mixture, I suppose, of luck and just putting together your Celtic emotion and writing things down. And I think that with anything in life, if you speak from the heart, then things come through. And when you're talking about Celtic, there is no substitute. You're talking about how you feel about it. And I think anybody, not only me, and tens of thousands of people, given the opportunity to speak about something that really matters to them and they love, then I think that emotion can come through, and I think it did come through in the book, thankfully. And a lot of the tales in the book are tales that you and I and lots of other people have experienced, so maybe people could relate to some of those things.
What's your earliest memories of going to see Celtic, Matt?
Well, earliest memories would be occasional league games. My father had a hairdressing shop in Govan, and when I was a wee bit bad as a boy around about 10 or 11, I was made to work in the shop as punishment. Anyway, I had to go in and wash people's hair, and in those days it was shampoo sets. I remember I used to wash between 36 and 40 skulls each morning, and if it wasn't raining, my dad would take me to the game. So I'm a wee bit mentally fixated with the weather, even today in my older years, because I always went outside the shop and looked up to the sky to see if it was going to be raining. Then I knew I was going to paradise. That's true. That's actually true. So I can remember, well, I can speak a bit later on, various other nights, and I can't actually remember, probably thinking back 7 or 8, I can't actually remember specific games,
So I'm okay for coming up and getting my hair done off you and things like that?
Well, it's if you're fancying a shampoo and set, and I can see your locks are quite curly from underneath your beanie hat there, why not?
We'll leave the subject to my fantastic head of hair to another time, and we'll find out what your first song is.
The first song is from a guy who's a real musical icon. He was a big influence in me in getting into music, and because he was so different. Saw him playing at the Apollo, which used to be called Green's Playhouse, which is now the Walkabout pub, and the cinema next door to it. That used to be Green's Playhouse, which was the Apollo, and the Apollo was a fantastic arena, probably the biggest arena in Glasgow for rock bands to come to. I think it might have been around about 72, 73, and the band who was the warm-up band was nothing like Bowie. It was Steelers Wheel. Jerry Rafferty and Joe Egan, I think, was one of the other guys that was quite well known. And when I saw Bowie, I'd obviously heard these records. I thought, this guy's different, this is absolutely brilliant. So this song is one of my favourites from it.
That was Ziggy Stardust by David Bowie. Right, Matt, how did you get into Celts for Change?
Well, I was doing a fanzine round about 1990, and Brian Dempsey had come onto the board and was off it again within 6 months. And at that time, there was definite required change at Celtic. Rangers were running away with quite a lot of things at that time, and they had seemed to have lots of money, and they had a ground which was our ground was in disrepair, and they had sort of rebuilt their ground, and things weren't looking great. And I was kind of motivated with the fact that Brian Dempsey had been kicked off the board, and it now seemed to be like families totally controlling what was going on there. And I felt that if something wasn't done then, and it wasn't just me, there was several people, and tens of thousands of fans as well, made it happen. If something wasn't done then, Rangers could have been looking at going on to, maybe 15, 16 in a row, because they're already at 6 in a row around about 1994, and they had the finance then. A lot different for them now, but at that time things were serious. I basically put an advert in the Sunday Mail, cost about £90, and I said, if you care about the welfare of your club, please turn up tonight at the City Halls in Glasgow. And the following night, or a couple of nights later, whenever it was, about 35 people turned up. It's one of the smallest rooms in the City Halls. There's various sizes of rooms there. And I basically stood up and says, Matt McGlone, I edit the Celtic fanzine. Once a Tim, always a Tim. Street name for a Celtic fan. Once a Celtic fan, you're always a Celtic fan. And some people, and listen, we were questioned, who are you, what are you about? You could have been an enemy for people that had never heard of you. Nobody had ever heard of me anyway. So you were questioned, and I think that was fine. Obviously, if any movement was starting up today, I'd be wanting to question who the people were as well. So that happened, and then a few other people came on board, and from that meeting we had Brendan Sweeney, who a fantastic fighter for the Celtic cause, Davy Cunningham, who was, I didn't know Brendan at all, and I didn't know Davy. Davy and Brendan knew each other from school in Clydebank, and Brendan said to me that Davy was really interested in trying to do something here, and a guy, John Thompson, stepped forward as well. So there was 4 of us for the next meeting, and when I turned up for the next meeting, again put the same advert in. There was fans queuing up candle rigs in Glasgow and round the corner onto a girls' street, and I actually thought for a minute that there was another Celtic night on, and that we had clashed, and there was another Celtic night on in the same hall. As it turned out, these 350 people had come to the next Celts for Change meeting. No internet in those days, everything was done by leaflets, and I really felt a real jolt going right through me. I felt a real live something is going on here, and what a feeling, I think, from 35 to 350. And I got up and spoke, and I think Davey and Brendan got up and spoke, and people began to get a grip of what Celts for Change were about, and I think they could see that it was just raw honesty, raw emotion. We weren't public speakers, we didn't know how to arrange things. we did know how to speak with passion about something we cared about and loved, and we knew how to print leaflets and make banners, and it was all raw material from that, and from that grew the street movement, which was Celts for Change.
Fantastic. I take it not every Celtic fan agreed, so how did you find the reaction with some of them?
As the thing went on, started around about October 1993. As it went on, we get no support at all from the Celtic Supporters Association. Their committee weren't interested in us, and they were quite against us, in fact, which made the job a lot harder. The committee at that time were very friendly with the board, and they were never out of Parkhead. The affiliation of Celtic Supporters Clubs was the other main group, and they weren't interested in helping us either. We eventually had meetings with both groups, and they basically told us, they weren't interested in us. The key thing, though, although that was a disappointment, I did say to the rest of the lads, and they flagged it up as well, is that half a dozen people on a committee don't speak for the entire Celtic support. And what happened was, through various other rallies and demonstrations, we had a rally in Airdrie Town Hall, we had a rally in Govan Town Hall, we took it out everywhere, and momentum was gathering. So therefore, people within the Celtic Supporters Association and within the affiliation of registered Celtic Supporters Clubs questioned their committees to say, why are you not backing these guys? So it was a groundswell of Celtic fans who made it happen, and we eventually had meetings with them. But at no point during any of that campaign were they interested in helping us, which was a big disappointment. But I always thought, well, a committee doesn't speak for tens of thousands, just like we don't speak for anybody. We just put out an idea there, and hopefully people will take it on. We're not spokesmen for anybody, we're not spokesmen. We are just people who got a group going, and if you were interested in what the aims of the group were, then you were welcome aboard, and thankfully tens of thousands of people joined.
Exactly. Well, I'm going to ask you some more about people's reactions in a moment. I'd like to go into your second song now, and if you'd like to explain.
Yeah, the second song is by a band called Free, a real rock band in the 70s. The long hair and the beards, and the rebel mentality, the attitude of just making good rock and roll songs. And the words in this song say absolutely everything, and it's got a wee personal connection with myself somewhere down the line, and I liked the song before I had the personal connection with it, and I like it even better now.
That was Free and My Brother Jake, a brilliant song. What did your parents think of your involvement?
Well, my father died sadly 34 years ago, and so he didn't know anything about it, and he was a major part of me being so into Celtic. Celtic for me is just not something to go and see on a Saturday. It's a moral thing, it's a way of life, it's the way you think, and I always think Celtic have stood for good things. I mean, some people might say, well, they think their team stands for good things as well, but Celtic, born out of charity, born out of starvation, born out of poverty, they had all the right raw materials to be something that you could love. And I think, when you grow up that way, Celtic were part of that ride going along, and you always related to it. It was always like, for me, Celtic were like your big brother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So my mother was around, and she was very supportive. My mother was a wee pensioner, brought up in Glasgow, around about Linthouse area, and all the morals and values you would have of a tough life in Glasgow, she would experience them. I was born in St Francis Nursing Home in Govan, nonetheless. There's a big shadow over that building somewhere, and I was delivered by by nuns, and that was because my mother was always trying to do better for us all, and it was the same in Celts for Change. She always encouraged me, and there was one particular meeting in Govan Town Hall when there was about 1,250 people there, and I had got hold of Michael Kelly's phone number, and I decided to phone him up live so the crowd could hear it, and ask him, ask him basically where he was taking Celtic. What was the aims? It wasn't a stunt call, it wasn't a spoof call. It was a phone call to say, I've got 12,500 Celtic fans here, and there's a couple of questions they would like to ask you, and could you just tell us which direction you think the club are going in? And he answered the phone and said, have a nice evening, I don't wish to speak to you. So we got some kind of reaction, and anyway, there was a few people in the crowd who were again questioning where the lads had came from, what you all about, and all the rest of it. And my mother was sitting somewhere in the crowd, and she marched up onto the stage, pulled the mic off me, and said, "Hey, you, listen, you. These boys they're all working hard during the day. Do you think they want to be doing this? They're all putting their own time and effort into it. They're having to put buckets around to pay for this hall. They're having to take time off from their wives and families to get involved in rallies and make banners and create posters and do leaflets. And all you're sitting there doing is being bloody negative. Why don't you just sit and listen to what the guys are saying? And if you don't like it, nobody's asking you to stay." And as she was drawing her last breath on that, and I was like standing there with a face like a beetroot, the crowd just stood up in the hall and started clapping her. And funny enough, 19 years later, a lot of people that were at that meeting come up and says to me, "You know something, Matt, what your mother did there," and nobody knew it was my mother, but what your mother did there was a real connection, and any doubters really had a sort of feeling that there was something happening here, and that this wasn't a carry on, and these guys were for real.
Oh, brilliant. It could have worked a different way, but
it could have worked a different way. But the thing is, Billy, I always think that if you have a driven emotion with Celtic, and you know where you're going with it, and you're confident in what you're doing is the right thing, then the outcome has to be positive.
Yeah.
And that's what I felt, and a lot of the times during this campaign, because remember, we weren't campaigners, we weren't politicians, we weren't activists, we were people who just had this drive to, and the thing that kept the drive going was the fans, obviously, because if the fans hadn't taken to the group, then there wouldn't have been much there. But the board were making mistake after mistake, so in a lot of ways they made our job a bit easier. So I think that when you have that sort of spirit, I suppose, then I always preach to the guys when the heads were down, and my head was down quite a lot of times as well, because this was no smooth ride. Let's get crystal clear on this. This was hard work, but we encouraged each other, and we said to each other when somebody's head would be down, let's just keep going here. We've been doing this 2 months now, we're doing it 3 months now, we're doing it 4 months now. And round about the January, we went to Ireland, and we went to the Imperial Hotel in Dundalk. There was delegates from 52 Irish Celtic supporters clubs there, and all of the lads stood up and spoke. They all spoke from the heart, and our aim was to say to them, can we have your support, please? Can the Irish boys and girls look at Celtics for Change and see if you might be interested in coming along with us and on the journey we're going here, and what the aims of the group were. We all had our names. It's Brendan, Matt, there was Davey, by that time there was another guy out on board, Colin Duncan, and John Thompson. So everybody knew who everybody was. You could be identified. There was no face. There was no who are these people? They're not mysterious. We all had names and faces, and people could relate to us as to who we were. There was nothing done incognito, and there was nothing anonymous about the whole thing. And I think that's important when you're trying to drive forward any thoughts or campaigns, so people can relate to you. Yeah.
How did I'm sure the board were really enamoured with you. How did they react to you?
Well, the board basically hated us. We were upstarts, we were malcontents, we were irreverents. Sometimes you wondered if you had a second name at all. But what they forgot was that we were the lifeblood of the club, and although they were families who were holding on to it and holding on to the wealth, and whatever that wealth is distributed, that must be one of the mysteries of the world. They took the fans for granted, in my opinion, and we had several meetings with a few of them, and it was a bus that we were driving, which never stopped, and we met with Tom Grant, And I'd certain sympathies with Tom Grant, because Tom was getting sort of led along with the rest of them, and the board created a legal pact that none of the 5 main directors could break away from each other. So 1 minute Tom Grant would be at David Lowe's house at a Rebel meeting where the Rebels used to meet, and the next minute he'd be sitting with the board. And there was one point, in fact I answered the door to him. The door went when we were having a sort of Rebel meeting. I think it was most of the lads in Celts for Change were there. Davy's house in the West End, and we're working out where to go. David Lowe, for anybody that doesn't know him, was involved in the financial side, and we didn't know him, but we got to know him. They were running a sort of separate campaign from the sort of financial business side of things, which we didn't really understand, but all we did was do what we could do with the sort of street idea. Anyway, at that Rebel meeting, the door went, and I opened the door. Davy says, get the door, and I opened the door, and Tom Grant was standing there, a member of the board, and we're inside here, making plans to topple him. And I says, okay, come in. And came in and sat down, and at that point, Tom was swithering as to whether to sort of join the Rebel faction or to stay with the board. That meeting, or the information on that meeting, got out somewhere, and the board thereafter tied Tom into a 5-year deal that he couldn't leave the pact, and unfortunately we never saw him again.
That sounds like the board at the time. Right, well, I'm going to go into your next song. Do you want to have a wee explanation about that one?
Yep. The next song is The Eagles. And there's a wee story behind this song, because early in the 70s the Eagles were touring, and they played a couple of nights at the Apollo. They played Saturday and Sunday. I had tickets to go to the Saturday gig with a couple of people that were in my life at the time, and we had heard they were staying at the Albany Hotel in Glasgow, and we went down to sort of try and see them. We were wee groupies at the time, and we went down to try and see them, and the roadies were in fact staying there. And the roadies said they were staying at Turnberry Hotel. So the next day, me and a few folk went down to the Turnberry Hotel, and we hung about outside, again like we musical groupies. We had long hair, and we drove down in a blue Anglia, light blue Anglia car with a big white stripe up the side of it to look sort of more dynamic. And I still get ribbed to this day that I drove it into the Turnberry car park and put the crook lock on. I bought the car for £90, but I still didn't want it stolen. But I don't think you put crook locks in cars now, or even in big fancy hotel car parks like the Turnberry. So we stood there for about 4 hours, and Joe Walsh came out, and he says, hey you guys, you must be really freezing. And we're like, he's shivering away, and he said, come on in, have a cup of tea. And he came in and we sat down with Don Felder, who's this very famous guitarist for the Eagles, who played the double neck White Gibson guitar that's is particularly prevalent on the Hotel California. And also sat with Glenn Frey, and he was just chatting away, and he said, what's your names, etc. And I said, my name's Matt, and with long hair at the time down to your shoulders or past it. And he said, oh yeah, I've got a brother called Matt. And I was in work the next day saying, oh, met Don Felder last night, and he's got a brother with the same name as me. So it was brilliant. But he said to us, you going to the gig tonight? And they said, no, we couldn't get tickets. And he says, would you like to come along? I was gobsmacked. There was 4 of us, and I said, yeah, 2 guys, 2 girls. And he said, have you got transport back up to Glasgow? And of course I've got the Anglia sitting there with the big white stripe up it and the crook lock on it. And I said, yeah, we've got our own transport. And the idea is that they were going to take us up in the bus with the roadies. So the deal was to go down the lane at the Apollo round about 7:30, and a roadie came out with Glenn Frey just behind him, and he says, yeah, it's those 4 there. And we went in, and I swear to God, we were put into the front row, and it was mesmerising, absolutely fantastic. The guys like Felder and Henley and Joe Walsh and that we had met that afternoon were sort of playing and looking down at us and nodding, and it was just like, this can't be real, this was just fantastic. So this song is by the Eagles, and it's one of their very best. I'm sure you'll love it. Great intro and great song altogether.
Hotel California by Eagles, fantastic track. As I said earlier, Matt, now you were instrumental in bringing Fergus to Celtic. How did you find the man, and how did you get on with him?
The first time I met Fergus, he agreed to do an interview in an office in Carlton Place in Glasgow, for the ones of Tim Hauser Tim, and for us it was a great scoop because I'd never met the guy, didn't know anything about him, had only known what we had heard and read in papers and in TV and radio, etc. Very direct guy, Fergus, a man in a mission, to be honest with you. Had no time for small talk. He was never going to win a personality contest in the world, and he never saw that as his remit, because his remit was to restructure what was Celtic and wreckage, to be honest with you. So by saying all that, he had a likeable side to him, although you would never have you'd never see a laughing and joking Fergus, but he could also be extremely funny as well, but only when the business was out the way and he was sort of in relaxing mode. But you never really saw him in relaxing mode very much. But there was one particular dinner round about November 1993. He had been over and he had made an offer. To be honest with you, this is an incredible amount of money, but he made an offer around about 17.5 million in November, although he paid 6.5 million for it in the following March. Made about a £17.5 million offer to buy out the club completely, and he obviously had backers, and this was knocked back. Brian Dempsey arranged a dinner at the Thistle Hotel, and it was 9 guys who were in some way involved in the takeover bids, and I was there from Celts for Change, and the 9 other guys, the other 8 guys apart from Fergus, there was David Lowe, so that left another 6 guys I didn't know at all. And at the end of this dinner, the dinner was arranged by Brian Dempsey to thank Fergus for his efforts for coming over and doing things. Fergus had said he'd had enough, they weren't taking that offer, he wasn't interested, he could do no more, he was going back to Canada, and that was the end of that. So this was a wee thank you dinner, and at the end of that dinner, Fergus asked everybody, or Brian, can't remember which one it was, to stand up and say what Celtic meant to them. Now, this is 1993, the campaign was 2 or 3 months underway, it was helter-skelter, relationships were, you know, at a crucial point with people in your life because you were hardly ever there, you were almost fixated with doing all the work that was needed in this campaign. But it was, you know, you were on a journey you couldn't really get off once we had started it, and the fact things were going great. So I was quite nervous at this point. In fact, I was extremely nervous, and I was, I think, the second last person to speak. And when it came round, Fergus was the guy in front of me, and I thought, I'm just going to stand up here. I don't know anything about these business guys. I don't know anything about the business. I'm just going to stand up and say what a wee guy from Pollock thinks about supporting Celtic. And anyway, Fergus stood up in front of me, and I'll never ever forget these words. It's words I had never thought that would come out his mouth. He stood up and he said that every Celtic fan anywhere in the world should be proud of everything they've achieved, because everything they've achieved in their life, they've achieved in their own merit without having to join any secret organisation to get there. And that riveted right through me. I thought, wow, I said, you know, there's a guy that does really understand what the fans' mentality is about. And I never ever forgot those words. I never needed reminded of them. And I just thought, that really does sum up a Celtic fan. You know, we don't have to join secret organisations to get anywhere in life. We do enjoy achieving things in life in our own merit, whether it's family or whether it's supporting Celtic or whether it's anything we're doing at our work. So Fergus kind of encapsulated all that in that wee statement, and I thought, you know, this guy's a real deal. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And the whole 5 years he was at Celtic Park, I think I only crossed his path 3 or 4 times. And any time you did, he was running about Celtic Park, a big pile of folders and papers under his arms, work to be done. And there was one night I had been in the building quite late, and he was leaving at the same time, and he said to me, which way are you going, Matt, which way are you going? He stayed in Pollock Shields at the time, and I was living in Shawlands at the time, so it was quite nearby. And I said, I'm just going home. Fergus didn't drive, and he always get taxis everywhere. And he says, can you drop me off? Can you drop me off in Pollock Shields? You drop me off Pollock Shields? And I said, yeah. I says, no problem at all. So I drove down London Road, right through Bridgeton Cross, and just before he came out of the car, I've got pizza boxes and old burgers lying in the front seat, newspaper sweetie wrappers for the kids being out in the car, and it was like, oh, I need a quick 30 seconds in here before he dives into the car. So he jumped in and sort of looked around and went, nice car. And we drove down London Road, and he went through Bridgeton Cross, and he said to me, what's happening here? We're going through Bridgeton Cross. And I says, yeah, no. I says, this is the way I go. He says, well, my driver doesn't normally take me this way. We don't usually go this way. And I thought, I was quite nervous because he said that to me. I was still overawed by him. And I sort of blurted something out without plan. I said, well, I'm giving you a run up the road, and if you want to run up the road, this is the way I'm going. And so the next minute we're at the Carlton, and we're going through the Gorbals, to cut down onto Salt Market and up Broomalaw and over to Pollock Shields that way. So never really met Fergus much, but he had a really dry sense of humour and could crack a funny, but a very driven man as far as he knew what he wanted. And in my opinion, when he was booed at Celtic Park, that was one of the worst moments as being a Celtic fan, because basically I felt people weren't understanding what the guy was achieving at Celtic and were being led along by some of the media stuff. The Daily Record had him as comparable to Saddam Hussein at the time, which one, I can't remember the exact phrase, but which one's the tyrant. And, all of that kind of thing was very media driven. And the reason that Fergus was unpopular with the media, because unlike other clubs and a club that's just went asunder last year there and struggling to make any kind of impression, Fergus never gave them tidbits. He never gave them wee stories. He never said to a journalist, here, I'll give you this one so that your tabloid will get it before the other one. And that's how tabloids work. They work on favours. They work on people giving a certain journalist a wee tip, and they'll use both the main tabloids in Scotland. And of course they get quality papers like the Scotsman and the London Times and the Glasgow Herald and these kind of things. But the two main tabloids, I don't even want to mention their name, but you know what they are. They were always getting fed wee tidbits from other places. And Fergus never did that. So because he never did that, he wasn't popular with them. So they always try to get him. And some people unfortunately believed that. But I can safely say, from what I know now, and I've never seen Fergus since, he was an absolute stalwart for Celtic, a real hero in getting them back. And I tell you what, if we went through some hard times and difficult questioning, he went through 10 times worse. Yeah.
Well, the media, we all love them, don't we?
Yeah, the media, the media are getting found out now because, as you know yourself, Billy, in the world of new media, people can express themselves and they can have a bit of fun. You're absolute king of the comedy at the minute with your videos and your takes and things and your songs. They're all very clever, very imaginative. And people can now express themselves, so they don't have to read the media. In those days, there was no internet, so people had no way of expressing how they felt about things, but now people can do it, and it's great to see.
Good stuff. Your next song, I'll let you explain that one.
The next song is, for me, the king of grunge. Neil Young has written so many great songs, and he's still going around. In fact, I've just got tickets recently to go and see him in Glasgow this June. He can write lovely guitar songs on acoustic, and he can also do 3-4 man electric guitar stuff with Crazy Horse, and this is one of my favourite Neil Young songs.
Neil Young and Crazy Horse in a song called Cinnamon Girl. You seem a very moral man, Matt. Who would you put this down to?
Well, I think it's down to your parents, to be honest with you. I think that my mother was always wanting to do better for us, and she had a couple of different jobs, and she wanted to send us to fee-paying schools, and that might be looked upon a bit different now, but in those days it was to sort of try and drag you out of the sort of system that was existing in housing schemes at the time. But unfortunately it wasn't for me. My sister went to Notre Dame, and I was at St Monica's in Pollock, and then Lourdes Senior Secondary in Cardonald and Paisley Road West down at near Moss Park. And my mother had been taking a couple of extra jobs to sort of pay for this, and she sent me for an exam. I got an entrance exam thing at St Aloysius in Glasgow, and I I was a bit disturbed by this because standing at a bus stop on Crookston Road, waiting to get the 23 and the 54 to Lourdes School, was all my pals that I played with, all your mates that you were kicking around with, and I immediately identified before the sentence was even out of my mother's mouth that I would be standing there if I went to the school with a green blazer on, and I'd immediately be different from my friends. Right. And being different from my friends was really kind of uncomfortable for me. So this is not a word of a lie. I went and I sort of doodled for the 2 hours of the exam, and I just sort of drew letters and words, and then did them in sort of 3D and shadows around them all. And when I handed the thing back in, I remember the kind of teacher or whoever it was, the head, looking at this as if that guy McGlone is obviously no well. He's got some kind of mental problem. He hasn't answered a question here, and he is an absolute total fail. And for me, that was mission accomplished. An absolute total fail. And therefore then went to Lourdes School. My sister continued to go to Notre Dame, which was a fee-paying school at the time and taught by nuns. It isn't anymore. So that was the result for me. So morals, I always think my mother was an absolutely wonderful woman, and so was my father. My father died when I was quite young. He died about 34 years ago. But he took me to all the games, and I always remember walking up. I was all of the home games leading up to the European Cup final in 1967, and I remember, Dukla Prague and Vojvodina and Nantes, and we were walking up to all these matches, and the car would be parked down near sort of Bridgeton Cross area, and there was always a long walk up London Road, and you can see these floodlights in the distance, in your heart, you're thinking, you're sitting all day at school, knowing that you're going to this sort of theatre at night, and you're asking your pals in the class, is your dad taking you going somewhere, and it just depended on people's circumstances at the time. And walking up to see these floodlights getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and thinking of getting a macaroon bar, it was an absolute thrill. And going to see this Celtic team, what an education these guys were. Nobody knew they were the Lisbon Lions in a couple of months' time, but this was them. And that was really down to my father. My mother's brother, when I was born, I was meant to be called Frank after my dad, but my mother's brother, who out of all the boys in her family, he was the only one that went religiously to Celtic games, and he was unfortunately killed going to a Celtic game at Queen Street Station. The train was leaving to take the supporters up to Kirkcaldy, and there was a bit of pushing and shoving on the platform. It was a complete accident, and Matthew, 6 weeks before I was due to be born, was pushed onto the track, and he was killed. So my mother obviously was grief-stricken and really upset, and so I was then called Matthew instead of Frank after my dad. But my dad was a wonderful influence with Celtic, and he would always try and keep me out of the jungle, but he was taken into hospital with a heart attack, which he recovered from initially, and he was in hospital for 2 or 3 months, and when he came out, I had long hair and I was going to the jungle, and any time I was going to the games, I went with him. This was a sea change. My dad was quite a strict hard man from Linthouse, and brought up in a family with no female influence at all. There's 4 brothers, and very hard life in those days, 4 of them all in one room kind of thing. In the army, a guy coming to the door when the Second World War was going on, and taking 2 away at 3 o'clock in the morning who were old enough to be drafted into the army, and not seeing his brothers again for 5 or 6 years and things like that. So they came from a very, very male, hard environment, and he kind of passed that, not that hardness on, but he passed on that morals of everything you have for, you sort of work for, and everything you've got you should be grateful for, and never try and get above your station, and if you stick by that, it should be fine. So this song is in memory of my dad, and Get Up London Road.
That was Frank Patterson singing Faith of Our Fathers. What irritates you, Matt?
Irritates me? Wow, quite a lot of things irritate me actually. And as I got older, I've tried not to let them irritate me. And I try and learn every day, because I think everybody makes mistakes every day, and I think you can learn every day, no matter what age you are. Stupid people irritate me. Bigots irritate me. And people that want to snipe and have a go at you irritates me. When I'm on Twitter, I've really learned not to take the bait with some people, and because a lot of people on Twitter, they're keyboard musketeers. They'll fight you from behind a keyboard and snipe away but never show their face or give their name. To me, that's cowardness. My picture is regularly up there. People know who I am. If you wanted a picture of me, you could get it anywhere. So that kind of thing irritates me. And particularly small-minded people really irritate me. And I think small-minded people can get under your skin, but again, the education for yourself every day is to try and make yourself a person that doesn't get irritated by that.
Exactly. Your next song?
The next song is a song when I was washing those 36 skulls to 40 skulls in my father's shop when I was naughty, and I was about 10 or 11, and this song came out, and heard it on the radio. And I'm sure this woman must have had her hair washed for about 5 minutes when I was listening to this, because I was totally transfixed by it. And it's from the Rolling Stones, and it's one of their great songs. But I mean, a Stones song, I could pick another 15 great songs.
That was the Rolling Stones and Brown Sugar. Right, I've asked you what irritates you. How do you relax?
How to relax? Like a pint. I like my friends' company. I like to do different things. I've been into a spot of winter mountain climbing for the past 25 years, and when a magazine's finished, I like to go and give my head a good hoover, get all the information in the mag, because when you're editing a mag, you've got the entire mag in your head, and it's a lot different from when somebody reads it, they read a page at a time. You're carrying all this around for, at least a week. So I like to go up to the Cairngorms, and I do a bit of climbing. There's two particular corries up there, Corrian Schnechter, which is right next to the ski area, and then there's Corrian Lochen, which is to the right hand side of that. Corrie is a Gaelic name for the mouth of a mountain. So these two are kind of particular horse-shaped corries. And my son, who was 12 just the other day there, he's called Corey. And I remember at the time said to his mother that Corrie was quite a nice name, which is the Gaelic spelling of mouth of a mountain is C-O-I-R-E, and she didn't quite like that, and I wanted to sort of keep that connotation of the name, so he's called Corey, and his name's spelled C-O-R-E-Y. He's 12, and he's a season ticket holder, and he goes along, and he's got 18 football strips. He keeps telling me, and he's a bit of a wizard on the iPad, and as all kids are nowadays, they're teaching their dads and their mum and dads a lesson how it all works. And so I like to relax, going to the games. I don't do an awful lot of reading. I like to read autobiographies, and I like to read various other books, but I'm not a huge reader of fiction. I think there's enough fiction in my head without having to read somebody else's, to be honest with you. And I like to do the outdoor bit, and I like to keep in touch with friends, and
Well, you're saying about the writing, you've obviously got the Alternative View. How did that kind of evolve, and is it changing in the future in any way?
I think magazines and new media are constantly changing. I worked for Celtic from 1995 to 2002. Initially, Fergus gave me a 2-year contract. I didn't actually think it would work, because I'd taken the irreverent style of that type of writing into Celtic View. I thought, this is an in-house magazine, this is never going to work. But to be fair to the wee man, he did give me his word. Nothing in writing, but he did give me his word that he wouldn't be stepping in to edit anything. So I did it for 2 years. I was just working part-time. I'd only get into the building on a Sunday to hand in what was then a floppy disk with your article on it. And I then got another 2-year contract, and then Alan McDonald had come into Celtic, and he'd asked me if I wanted to come in full time, because he'd said that Celtic had done market research through Leicester University, and they were asking fans what they liked, from the Celtic View to the matchday programme, to buying Celtic Pils tickets, to eating Celtic pizzas and pies, and anything to do with Celtic. What were you interested in? The club were developing and trying to build up a base of how to earn income streams from fans. So he said to me that some of my stuff had been up there in the 75-80% of what people liked, and he says on the back of that research that we've asked the fans what they like, would you like to come in full time? And I did, and edited the letters page, because people always said that the directors were writing their own letters, and they were editing them. And So he says, you're trusted with this, and the letters that come in, the internet was coming into force then, and a lot of letters came in via the internet, people send things, and I remember back at that time, around about 2000, you'd be lucky if you got 3 or 4 physical letters, handwritten letters a week into the Celtic View, but most of the stuff was beginning to come through, and people were emailing in from Canada and America and all that kind of thing. I then created a spoof character called Nick McGuinness, and Nick was a right cheeky guy, and Nick McGuinness came from stealing your drink, Nick McGuinness, and young Nick, who was me, would be going to the press conferences at Celtic Park, and they'd be taking a really irreverent slant on some of the media guys, and Celtic thought this was quite a good idea, and I was the man to do it, so I did that for a while, and I also did my column in Celtic View, which was sometimes 1 and 2 pages. The early days of the Celtic internet, we used to do a Wednesday interview, which wasn't Celtic TV, it was like Celtic radio, and although you couldn't be seen, this was going out every lunchtime on a Wednesday, and I was free to choose whoever I wanted as guests, and I had various people in, from Dixie Deans to Archie McPherson to Willie McStay, Andy Walker, and various other guys, and I would create the questions for that show, and I'd conduct the show myself. Unfortunately, the Celtic media room became polluted with major egos, and I found it very difficult to work there. There was, I don't know if it was jealousy on their part, but I had pretty much a free hand to do what I was doing. And I think if you're going to be a creative person and create things like Nick McGuinness page and create a radio show which was going all around the world, people used to get back to you from Los Angeles saying they were listening to it, and it was great feedback. And I think you have to have a bit of a free hand, and I was never reckless with having a free hand. I knew where the white line was, as it were, but there was some major egos, and there's a couple of them still there today. I just found it suffocating. There were a couple of instances on stuff being edited out of my work, and stuff being edited not very nicely in the Celtic View letters pages, which I'm not going to go into at the minute, but I might at some time in the future. And I went to see the chief executive at the time, Ian McLeod, and I said, there's an incident happened here in the editing of various things in the club newspaper, the Celtic View, and I'd like to investigate it. I gave him all the evidence of who did it, and he kind of more or less says to me, don't worry about it, we'll get it sorted out, I would take a week off. And I said, I don't need a week off. I says, I'm finding it very difficult to work in there with some of these people now, because this doesn't seem to be about what's best for Celtic. This seems to be about people's egos, people climbing on top of each other to get somewhere, and the Celtic product was coming second. So then eventually he says, come back in a couple of weeks and see how you feel. When I say come back in a couple of weeks, come back into my office. I wasn't out anywhere. Then I went back in a few weeks later, and I said, listen, I feel I've got to move out of here. I said, I think my time at Celtic's come to an end. I says, it's suffocating in the media room there, and there's certain dominant males there who I couldn't really be interested in ego fighting with them. I says, I still feel I'm creative, and I still feel I'd like to create something else, and that's what I'm going to do. And from that, I created a magazine called The Alternative View, which was a section within the Celtic View. There was an Alternative View section within the Celtic View, and there was a bit to and fro, and I couldn't take the name with me. But I said, listen, I brought this name with me. I created this name, I brought it into Celtic, and I'm leaving, and I'm taking it with me. And I left, and the main organiser for the Glasgow Union of Journalists, Mr. Holleran, had said to me later on, you should have cut yourself a deal, because I had a year left of my contract, and I basically left with the work that I had done there, and I didn't take anything else that I might have been due in my contract as part of a payoff. I just walked out of the building with a couple of weeks' notice, and I started up the magazine. And it's challenging, there's no doubt about it. It's challenging putting a magazine together. It's challenging times with the internet. There's lots of free stuff in the internet, but I still think there's a market there. In fact, I know there's a market there for, going by our sales figures, for people to buy a magazine, a hard copy being a physical magazine piece of paper. So I dare say that in the future, maybe in the not too distant future, we'll look at going online, and but I don't think there's a sea change for that quite at the minute yet. I think there's a lot of other big magazines and various other publications. You've got to look at them and see what they're doing. But you know, for us to produce a magazine and to put the whole thing together is a considerable cost. The biggest bill is, of course, the printer and the people that make up the mag from, you know, sort of design point, and you know, obviously the input is from various Celtic fans that work within it. So the magazine's going well. It's good. It's challenging because without Rangers being in the league at the minute, there has definitely been a drop of interest in not in the magazine but in everything surrounding Celtic. It's difficult for Celtic to sell season tickets at the minute. It's difficult to get a good turnout at games, and it's difficult to get a real good atmosphere going in the ground if it's not the guys in the Green Brigade singing. People are coming along with apathy. There's not a lot of expectation. A quick example would be a few months ago when we lost a couple of last minute goals up at Tannadice. We were 2-0 up and Dundee United made it 2 each. You'd have been mad, you'd have been raging at that in the past, and you'd been looking at who Rangers were playing the next week to see if you could catch that up, if they were in danger of dropping like a couple of points. But that's not there now, and I think some of the displays on the pitch this season have reflected that. And what used to be, you know, maybe an occasional thing has now become the norm. You know, we're 1-up after 15 seconds against Aberdeen, and we're 3-1 down. Second half to come back, spectacularly win 4-3. And we were 2-up at Ross County and we lost 3-2. And then we were 1-up after a few minutes in the last game there at St Mirren Park. And, you know, okay, there was mitigating circumstances there. It, you know, definitely wasn't a red card, and it definitely wasn't a penalty kick. Contact was no contact, and any what may have looked like a challenge, which wasn't actually a contactable challenge, was outside the box. So there were mitigating circumstances there, but I think Celtic had it in their locker to actually put that game away before Binyama was sent off and before the penalty incident, and I certainly think we'd enough in our locker not to lose a goal even with 10 men. So, you know, there's going to have to be an upsurge of spirit from the team and from the support, I think, in the coming months, and it's a big challenge for all the Celtic fans. Let's hope we do it.
Yep. Right, your penultimate song?
My penultimate song is Steve Harley. I worked down in London when I was round about I went down there, I was about 19. I finished my apprenticeship here, went down there and was bumming about London for a couple of years, and Steve Harley was out at the time with this absolute classic song, and I think a lot of younger people probably won't know who Steve Harley is, but he is the man who led a band called Cockney Rebel, and this song is absolutely brilliant. Right, that was Cockney Rebel and Come Up and See Me, Make Me Smile. Where have I heard that before? I think I know that wee tune. Anyway, before we go and hear your last song, I would like to give you the complete works of the Dandy and a copy of the Bible to take with you to your island. Would you like a copy of the Bible? Is it between the two? No, you can get the both. I can get the both. Can I get an extra luxury item if I don't take the other book? No, a wee bit of bartering going on here. Could be. Well, right, I'll give you two luxury items. I think I would need a toothbrush, because I think when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you want to do is clean your teeth, because I think it makes you feel clean. Apart from it makes you feel mentally clean. So I think I'd need a toothbrush, but then I'd have a problem because I wouldn't have any toothpaste. So I'm afraid the salty water would have to be used, that was lapping my feet each day, to be used with toothpaste. So that would be one luxury item. I think I would need a knife, because to survive in a desert island you would have to hunt, and you'd have to go up trees and get melons and things, and you know, you'd need a knife to cut it open, and coconuts, and you could cut wood with a knife and maybe even start a fire. And start's been an important word here for something that's coming up. But yeah, I think you need a knife because you can do various things with a knife for survival techniques. So that would be my two luxury items, yeah. And the book I would take would be the Bible. I'm not a great reader of the Bible. I read passages from it and I've never read it right through. But I think whoever put that together is pretty clever. And I dare say it's been updated and, you know, added to along the way. But yeah, I would take the Bible, because I think your spirits could drop quite a lot if you're isolated and you're lonely, and you know, you're waving at ships that are constantly passing 5 miles away and they don't see you. So one minute you'd be happy, next minute you'd be dead sad. So I think the Bible, there'd be passages in the Bible which could lift your spirits, and you know, which are quite prolific and quite something you could believe in and take on board.
What book would you take that you're reading just now? Or?
I'm reading an absolutely fantastic book just now. It's by a guy called Gary McGlone, and it's called The Gang of One. Gary found himself in prison in America, and it's a book basically about the man's survival in there. He's from Glasgow, and he's actually from the same area as me, but I didn't actually know him, obviously, and I still haven't met him. But he was in prison, and he explains why in the prison. And when he came out of prison, his daughter wasn't here, and Gary has embarked on searching for his daughter around the world, and he's paying certain people, certain private detectives, to try and trace where his daughter is. And some of the latest stuff I've been hearing about it, which is not in the book, that he's paying people and then they're asking for another $10,000 to give the phone number and another $5,000 to give an address. So he's been kind of held to blackmail quite a lot. But Gary's in a real search for his daughter, who he hasn't seen since he was put into prison in America. He's a big Celtic fan. He's back in the UK now, and he actually sent me a copy of his book, and he wrote a lovely message inside it for me, which is you know, I'm very appreciative of that. So if you're looking for a book which you can relate to, as far as a guy comes from Glasgow, Scottish guy, and his fight in the American prison system, then I would recommend Gang of One by Gary McGlone.
Your final song, Matt?
The final song is, I've had yous all going through the 70s today. I don't know if there's an 80s one in there, so we're going to hop, skip and a jump. The 80s, the 90s and the 2000s, and this is a song by a band, American band, who are out just now, who I think have got great energy. And Bowie, one of my heroes, did a duet with a couple of their songs, which you can find on YouTube. But this is a band called Arcade Fire, and it's been great talking to Billy. And this is the final song to play out. And keep the faith with Celtic. Remember, through the bad times, there's always a good time at the end of it. And you can never support another football team. So we're stuck with it.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for being the first Desert Island Tim.